Good evening and welcome to For the Record. Overloading of trucks and heavy goods vehicles has been a thorn in the side of the Fiji Roads Authority for a number of years now, but it seems that we've come to a stage where some drastic steps need to be taken and possibly have been taken in order to protect the road network that is being created around the country, the new roads, the new pavements that are being put in place by FRA and its contractors. To talk on this issue and other FRA issues, my guest tonight is the Chief Executive of the Fiji Roads Authority, John Hutchinson. Mr. Hutchinson, thank you very much for coming on For the Record.
Thank you very much, Edwin. You're welcome, and thanks very much for the invitation.
Overloading has always been seen as an issue that nobody has been able to really tackle effectively. Now, FRA, the Land Transport Authority and the Road Haulage Association have come up with an MOU. Of course, that is a long-term plan, but in the immediate term, what steps is FRA taking to ensure that overloading is dealt with?
The overloading issue really has been a matter of education and understanding over a period of time. And I think in the past 6 to 12 months, there's been understanding on all parties of the constraints that everyone suffers from and the impacts that overloading really is having on the road network. And there's been a technical working group established by the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport, which consists of all of the stakeholders, the Road Haulers Association, the Land Transport Authority and the Fiji Roads Authority and the Ministry, working closely together to try and address those issues. From an FRA perspective, we are charged by the government to maintain and enhance the land transport network throughout the country. That involves building new roads, and it involves maintaining the roads. We design and build those roads to certain criteria and with a certain life intended for those roads. The problem you have is with overloading, the life expectancy of the roads and particularly the bridges decreases exponentially. It's not a straight line deterioration, it's an exponential curve. And that, as a consequence, we design and build a road for a life of 25 years. It's wearing out in 4 to 5 years. Now that's a huge cost to the taxpayer. And I think there's a recognition that the cost of maintaining those roads is just spiralling out of control, and we really have to get a better handle on it, and we've done that, and we're working closely with all the stakeholders to fix it. Now, that's not an easy fix because transport operators have gone out and invested in trucks and moving goods around the country, and there's a huge, if we were just to take all the overloaded vehicles off the road tomorrow, there'd be a huge economic impact on the country. We have to understand that impact and we have to manage it, and we think we've come up with a compromise, with a good compromise and a workable compromise with the memorandum of understanding that's been signed. The legislation as it currently stands right here today allows for vehicles with a 32-tonne gross vehicle mass. That legislation is, quite frankly, well and truly out of date and antiquated, and doesn't take into account modern technology, modern trucks, modern design. The working group has put forward some proposed legislation which will move away from this fixed weight limit and move to a calculation of weight limits based on the load per axle and the spacing between axles. What that means ultimately, and it's a fairly complicated way of calculating, but what we're trying to do is to spread the weight out across multiple axles. So our goal from an FRA perspective is to encourage more multi-axle vehicles onto the road with the axles well spaced, which more evenly distributes the weight of the load that the vehicles are carrying across the surface of the road. And the best way of doing that in many respects is to bring articulated vehicles into the country, and the legislation is designed to do that. That's being prepared and will go to Parliament for approval. In the interim, we've proposed a transition arrangement which allows the transport operators and industry to operate their vehicles at a slightly higher weight limit than what the ultimate legislation will be, but that's designed to allow them to a 12-month period up until 31 December 2017 to refleet their vehicles and or modify their vehicles to comply with the new legislation. So that's a transitional arrangement. That transition arrangement allows about 20% over and above the new proposed weight limits that will apply. From an FRA perspective, that's not ideal, but it's an acceptable compromise that we've come to. Same as the Road Haulers Association have said, yes, they have to refleet their vehicles. That's going to be a cost to them. The LTA is charged with calculating the weight limits in accordance with the agreed calculations, and they will register those vehicles accordingly. And they also have the responsibility of enforcement. I note a recent press release from the Land Transport Authority that said that in the past 2 months they had booked 104 companies and individuals for overloaded vehicles and levied in excess of $1 million in fine. That just gives you people an idea of the scale of the problem. My biggest concern is these overloaded vehicles have an enormous detrimental impact on our roads and particularly on our bridges. And I'm really worried that a bridge is going to collapse.
And that's something that I'd like to pick on further, but we have to take a break now. We'll be back shortly.
Okay.
Naka, welcome back to the show. We're speaking with the Chief Executive of FRA, Mr. John Hutchinson. Mr. Hutchinson, the scale of damage that we're talking about from overloading, could you describe this to us? You mentioned earlier that you're afraid that a bridge could collapse. Is that the extreme that you're talking about, or is that a very real risk?
It's the extreme, but it's also every day that this overloading goes on, that risk increases. I think most residents of Lamy and Suva are aware of the issues that we had with the Tamavua-Iwai Bridge earlier in the year, before I arrived to take up my role. Now that damage was picked up by a member of the public who observed the bridge moving after a overloaded vehicle went across it and they were travelling behind that vehicle. Subsequent inspections, detailed engineering inspections, indicated some very serious damage to the bridge. Now we've carried out emergency repair, and people would recall that there was a weight limit placed on the bridge of 18 tonnes, one lane was closed, significant disruption to the public. Now that bridge and a number of the other bridges on the Queen's Road are extremely critical to the economic welfare of the country. 70% of the country's GDP travels between Lamy and Walu Bay. And there are 4 bridges and there are no alternate routes unless you drive all the way around the King's Road. So if one of those bridges is taken out, then we have an enormous problem. We have contingency plans in place should that occur, but my goal is to make certain that it doesn't occur. We've undertaken emergency repairs on the bridge, so I can assure the public that the bridge is safe to use, provided people adhere to the weight limit, which is 32 tonnes. Now those emergency repairs will keep that bridge going for another 3 to 5 years. We need to replace the bridge. We've already started planning for that to occur. And part of that planning process is actually to duplicate the bridge, so there will be in effect it'll be a 4-lane bridge, or 2 bridges side by side.
Distribute the weight?
Well, to also cater for the traffic flow and the congestion and everything else. And should one of the bridges fail, we've got an alternative there in place that it can be used. So we're building some redundancy.
Some of the roads, the newly built roads or the repaired roads which have suffered, people have questioned whether the quality of work is to blame for it. Is it completely because of the overloading issue?
Look, overloading is a major factor. What also contributes to failed roads is drainage. And if I was to give you an example, if I was to drive around the Kings and the Queens Road, there's probably about 5 or 6 sections, and most of the public would be able to say, yes, I know that's the area of road. I could pick out 5 or 6 sections where there is 400 or 500 metre length of road that's quite bad, being potholed, patched, and so on. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it closely, that's generally an area of poor drainage. So water either seeking through the top of the road or coming in through the sides of the road into the foundations of the road, combined with overloading, destroys a road in very short time. So we have to get better at fixing our drainage on our road network. Yes, at times there will be poor workmanship, and I don't shy away from that, and I accept responsibility for that. The FRA needs to ensure that its contractors are held to account for that poor workmanship. Now I can assure you that where we find that, we do hold those contractors to account. We require them to fix it at their cost.
Their own cost.
So it doesn't come out of the taxpayers' money. But often what it does do is push the time frame out on the project or the work. And we have had examples of poor workmanship around the country. I'm dealing with a lot of legacy issues, and we're endeavouring to fix those up as we go. Unfortunately, unless you've got proactive project management on site whilst the road's being built and you have appropriate quality control in place, sometimes things do go wrong. We need to ensure that that doesn't go wrong and we fix it. But overloading is by far and away the biggest concern that we have, and coupled with drainage and water. I think if you, I don't know whether you studied physics at high school, but water is one of the only things that doesn't compress. Mm. So when you put a weight on something and water's inside, it just pushes out. It just doesn't compress at all, and that's what damages our roads.
How much of the new network would you say has suffered from overloading, and to what extent?
It's very hard to put an exact figure on it, but I'm getting complaints and anecdotal reports to say, you built this road 5 years ago and it's back to what it was 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. What have you done wrong? That to me is a sure sign that that's overloading. The road just doesn't deteriorate that quickly in that space of time. It is very difficult to put a figure on it, but as you know, the government is investing significant sums of money in building new roads, and the government's investing significant amounts of money in maintaining our current network. Of course, as you add more road to the network, you have to continue to increase the maintenance bill. Now, unfortunately, Fiji, like most other Pacific Island countries, doesn't have a very good track record of maintenance. It's not part of our culture. Preventive maintenance is just simply not part of the Pacific culture. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of an operate to fail, using the technical parlance, it's an operate to fail culture. From a road network, that's disaster. because we build a road, we operate it, unless we keep maintaining it and keep on top of it, keep waterproofing the road, for example, then the road fails. And to rebuild a road versus just what we call resealing or waterproofing a road is about 5 or 6 times the cost of carrying out a reseal. I'd much prefer to reseal road so I can get 5 times more road done for the available dollars than having to rebuild it from scratch. And that's the challenge we face. And unfortunately we've had decades of underspend on maintenance, which has a huge maintenance backlog. I understand people's frustration. It annoys me as well, having to drive around and bounce over potholes and bounce over patched roads, and understand that. Where we identify roads for rehabilitation or rebuild, and we've got a plan out for the next 2 or 3 years on those roads to be fixed, and it's driven by our budget, we essentially do a minimal amount of maintenance on that road because we know we're going to come and rebuild it. So there's no point in spending a lot of money on it if we know we're going to dig it up and rebuild it in 2 years' time or 18 months' time or 12 months' time. So we have to plan that out.
All right, John, I'm going to have to pause you there for a second. We have to take a break. We'll be back in a short while. Ulunaka, welcome back to For the Record. Mr. Hutchinson, when you have to do all of these repairs on new roads, on roads which should have lasted 25 years, how does that affect FRA's plans in terms of the entire roading network in Fiji?
Okay.
Do you have to go back and redo your plan and decide?
Exactly. Yes, we do. We build a road and we design it and we build it for 25 years. Now, part of that is that we will have a planned maintenance schedule. For example, we will go and we will plan to come back every 3 to 5 years and do what we call a reseal, which is essentially put a waterproofing top over the coat, which is, for example, people have commented to me recently is, why did we go and put a new asphalt surface down on Rewa Street and Lathala Bay Road? The reason was they have been redone 3 years ago, and they were due for that waterproofing coat over the top to protect them. So that's in our plan. Now, if the wear and tear on the road is faster than we anticipate, then we have to either accelerate that reseal more often, which means that we're not getting best value out of our dollars. We might have to do it every 18 months instead of every 3 to 5 years. Or the road fails and we've got to come along and rebuild the road. Now, depending on what road that is and where it is, will determine our priorities for the rebuild. So, for example, if it's a new road and it's one of our major arterials where there's a lot of vehicular traffic or commercial traffic, and it's a high economic and social priority, that will get advanced up the priority list for repair versus another road which may have been scheduled for rehabilitation, in now, and has been waiting for 2 years to be rehabilitated. That's going to slide backwards. Now, the residents along that road are quite rightly going to be upset. So I have to balance those priorities and see what is the best net effect for the country. So the deterioration of our road network through overloading and drainage and those other factors, yes, we have to juggle those priorities around. If a road deteriorates faster than what we've planned, it throws our schedule out and we have to reorder the priorities. And unfortunately, sometimes people miss out because they end up being a lower priority than another section of road that we have to come back to.
Do you have a lot of areas that have missed out, and have they been growing over the years because of what we're facing now?
Look, I couldn't give you specific examples, but I would have to say yes. Our maintenance backlog is increasing. It's not, and despite the very large sums of money that government have been investing, we're not getting on top of the problem. You know, at best we're holding. At worst, we're going backwards, and you know, it becomes very hard to justify to government why they need to give us an increased budget because of that. At the moment, I can say it's because of the overloading issues that's causing these problems. But my preferred aim is to get on top of it, fix the roads, keep the roads in good condition, so the people of Fiji can prosper, do not have to put up with
Has the
bad
problem
roads.
become so bad that we are moving backwards?
I wouldn't like to say that. I would say we're holding the line at the moment, but we have the potential to go backwards
If we don't
get on top of it. I was fortunate enough to spend 3 years here 20 years ago, and I can say to people quite honestly that if you think the roads are bad now, you should have seen them 20 years ago. And people have short memories. I understand that. I also understand that people's expectations change. As the country develops and people become more affluent, their expectations grow. People want a sealed road outside the front of their house. They don't want a gravel road where the dust and noise and everything comes into their residence. I understand all of that, and that's an admirable expectation. My job is to actually meet those expectations, and I can't meet those expectations if I'm constantly going back and fixing roads that should be in a good condition but are not, because they've deteriorated through overloading and the other factors that we've discussed.
What's FRA's capacity right now for these new roads and for maintenance?
Our capacity is we structure ourselves and engage our contractors based on the budget allocations that we receive from government. One of the challenges that the FRA and the other statutory authorities face is that the government historically has operated on a cash-based accounting system and on a year-by-year budget cycle. It makes it difficult to do long-term planning and when you have a cash-based and year-by-year budget cycle. Now the government has already flagged that they're moving to a 3-year planning cycle. The government has flagged that there's a national development plan in place. All of these things are starting to integrate all of the statutory authorities, and we're starting to get better at our planning processes. And once you get the plans in place, you can then structure your organisation and allocate resources and plan accordingly, so you're not jumping around the place. I'm satisfied that we have the appropriate resources to deliver. Yes, I think everyone's aware of the recent departure of MWH from Fiji, or from out of our contractual arrangement with ourselves. That has caused us some issues, no two ways about that. And it has caused some delays in our program delivery. But we're working through those and we're addressing them. In some respects, we've got greater visibility now and greater clarity around some of our projects because we're much closer to them and our contractors than we were before when MWH was sitting as the intermediary.
What do you mean when you say that you have faced some issues? Are there any contracts that have been delayed which are facing problems? Because we're talking about an entire company which was handling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contracts for the FRA, and now you have to have a handover process.
Yeah. Well, basically the way the contract worked with MWH is they were essentially the FRA's arms and legs and did most of the hands-on work and interface with our contractors. We have some 150 projects in the plan this year. A number of those are projects that are in what we call defect liability period. In other words, they're projects that have been finished that we're in the process of managing the corrective actions on any of the outstanding issues. We have about 20 odd active projects right now. That's with physical work underway, and there's probably another 60 projects in the design pipeline and procurement pipeline. There's been no real impact on the projects in the defect liability period or in the active projects. The projects that are in the planning pipeline and the procurement pipeline, there have been some delays, because in some respects MWH was handling some of the design work or assisting us in the procurement process and things like that. Now, with their departure, we've had to take up that slack, and in some instances we've had to go out and get another design consultancy to complete the work or commence the work or whatever. But on top of that, you've also physically just got to get your head around exactly what has been done, hasn't been done, and because, you know, I have a responsibility to the board and to the government of Fiji to ensure best value. So I need to ensure that every dollar we spend is spent appropriately.
All right, Mr. Hutchinson, we have to take another break now. We'll be back after this short break. Good evening and welcome back to the show. My guest tonight is John Hutchinson, the Chief Executive of the Fiji Roads Authority. Mr. Hutchinson, you were telling us before the break that the FRA is managing effectively with the departure of MWH. When we're talking about the projects which are in the procurement stage and the design stage, are there going to be any delays when it comes to work on the ground? And what sort of delays?
Look, there will be some delays to the commencement of work on the ground for some of those projects, and that's an unfortunate consequence. What that may well mean is that some of that work, which originally we would have intended to have been completed in this current financial year, that is by 31 July 2017, may stretch into the next financial year. But it is my intent that we will commence most, if not all, of the projects scheduled for this year in one form or another before the end of the financial year. One of the things that we are currently reviewing as part of our process is ways that we can streamline and accelerate the delivery of those works. I think one of the criticisms of FRA and MWH in years gone by is that we were very slow to get work happening, and we were stuck in what I would call a design churn. We just kept going around designing things. We're moving to streamline that. And we're doing that through looking at a number of different ways we can do our procurement, how we engage our consultants, how we engage our contractors. That's taken us a little bit of time, but that process commenced before MWH left, and it's just obviously we've had to accelerate that with the departure of MWH. But I'm confident that people will start to see some action and activity in the very near future.
Have you taken on any new staff from MWH? FRA had said, look, because the company is shutting down, people are going to lose their jobs.
Yep. We're in the process. We advertised, I think, for some 76 vacancies. We had over 800 applications, which is much greater than the number of personnel that were employed by MWH. for those vacancies. That surprised us, but we also found it was a very welcome thing, is that so many people were very keen to come and work for the FRA. We've worked through those applications, and we've been undertaking interviews now for the past 2 weeks. We're still interviewing, and we have basically identified a number of potential candidates, which include both ex-MWH employees and non-MWH employees. Our view is we have an open, merit-based, competitive recruitment process. The best person for the job gets the job. And we're working through that process. We have engaged a number of people on short-term contracts, specifically in those areas where we just didn't have the coverage and it was work that MWH used to do for us. Some of those people were MWH people, others weren't. But we identified that they had the appropriate skills. We've brought them on a short-term contract to assist us in getting over the hump, if you like, whilst we go through the longer-term recruitment process. That process is almost at an end. I can say that we have, in some instances, we've had to go back to market now to do a second round of advertising because we didn't necessarily identify candidates that were suitable.
Just before we go to a break, with regards to how FRA will operate now that MWH is out of the picture, very quickly, Mr. Hutchinson, how does that change things for FRA and for roadworks in Fiji? Just a quick explanation.
Okay, the FRA prior was very much a very small organisation that relied very heavily on MWH as what was called its professional services advisor. The board in 2015 undertook a review and determined that MWH's contract would not be renewed past 31 December 2016. Part of that review also undertook a review of the functions that MWH did, and then determined what functions were best to continue to be outsourced to consultants and what functions were best to be brought in-house by FRA. The departure of MWH on the 23rd of September 2016 has accelerated that process, but it hasn't fundamentally changed the process. It's just accelerated it. There are functions that will continue to be outsourced, and tenders have been called. Tenders will be called for the provision of those services, and there are certain functions that FRA will do in-house, and that's why we've gone through the recruitment process and to expand our organisation to undertake those particular functions.
All right, with that we've come to the end of another segment. We'll be back shortly. Good evening and welcome back to the show. We're just about to wrap up for the evening, but before we go, John, let's just go back to the point of these trucks which are on the roads. I remember when the announcement was made that some trucks would actually be banned from imports into Fiji. Very quickly describe which ones you're talking about. Okay,
I think most people have seen these very large, heavy-duty Chinese-made dump trucks. These particular trucks are heavy-duty off-road vehicles. They're designed for mine sites and heavy construction sites and so on, and that was why they were originally brought into Fiji for some projects in that space. Somehow they have made it onto the road and they've been registered and they've been allowed to be imported. These particular vehicles, and they're 10 and 12 wheel vehicles, have quite a short wheelbase, and they're short in length, but they have a very large bin on the back, and they're also a very big truck in themselves, and a very, very heavy truck. As a consequence, these particular vehicles, empty, are legal. Normally the bin on the back will hold about 18 cubic metres. Now 18 cubic metres of material, depending on what you put in it, can move the weight of that particular truck somewhere up to 40 to 50 tonnes. So almost double the legal load limit. What makes it worse is because of their short wheelbase, and they've only either got 2 or 3 axles on the vehicles, it means that the weight on the axle is in some case 2 or 3 times the legal limit. These particular trucks cause enormous damage to our roads and our bridges, and because there's such a short wheelbase, they actually cause more damage on our bridges.
There's more weight exerted onto the road.
Exactly. Now the government has, we've made representation to the government through the ministry, and government minister has agreed that these vehicles the importation of these vehicles should cease, essentially be banned. That's fine for new vehicles coming into the country. The question then remains, what are we doing about the vehicles that are already in the country and are registered? And directions will be going out to the owners of those vehicles that they have to be modified. So essentially the bins, the carrying capacity will have to be reduced. And as a rule of thumb, you're looking at about cutting the bin in half.
To reduce the weight on the road.
To reduce the weight on the road.
All right, finally tonight, John, the Fiji Roads Authority has declined an application for road closure on Saturday, December 10th, for the Fiji Women's Rights Movement. They wanted to have a march through Suva. You said, no, it's a busy street. It's never occurred before. People have applied for applications for road closures because they want to hold a march. It's been approved. This is a first that we know of.
Generally speaking, the Fiji Roads Authority receives many hundreds of requests for road closures. We call them corridor access requests, and it could be for a road closure, it could be for a rolling road closure, and so on. Most of those are in relation to religious festivals, processions, and so on, and they're generally approved. In this particular instance, the Fiji Women's Rights Association wanted to hold a march from the flea market to Ratu Sakuna Park. And the route that they had proposed was through one of the most congested, busiest areas of Suva on a Saturday morning. The Fiji Roads Authority responded to them and said, we are not prepared to approve that route that you wish to use, but here is an alternate route that you may want to use. And the reason is that because of congestion, disruption to the general public, is we weren't prepared to approve that particular route.
John, just lastly, very quick question, we're out of time, but will you be taking a similar stand again on future applications by anyone for a Saturday morning?
Absolutely. I've had a similar request from the Fiji National University for a similar route, and this one it was down to Albert Park, for a march through town, the central business district, on a Saturday morning. We've said no.
Take an alternative route.
Either take an alternative route, or for this particular instance, because it was for a university marketing activity, we just said hold your marketing activity at Albert Park. Don't use the road.
John, thank you very much for coming on the show.
More than welcome. Thank you very much, Edwin.
Naka. That was For the Record for this evening. If you have any comments or questions, email us fortherecord@fbc.com.fj. Up next is Nemani Nilambatiki with My Say. From me, until next Sunday, good evening.